Go ahead and get started here. Probably be letting some folks in as we get going. I often use the word presence when I'm talking about what I love to explore with people, and presence seems to be a good word that captures a number of basic qualities of this, and the fact that it's here, that something is present, and this is undeniable, isn't it? We may not know what it is. We may not be able to really capture it and define it, as I often talk about, and we'll explore some more today, I imagine. But the fact that something is here is just absolutely undeniable. And that may seem obvious. Well, it is obvious that something's here. Something's actually present, whatever it may be. But I invite us to not take that for granted, this fact that something is here, because this is really where all the this is what we have to explore, of course, which is what is here. And so let's take a little time to explore that, the nature of what's present, this presence. So, and we can just do that together now. So I'm just going to point to some things that seem obvious, but we often maybe don't notice or appreciate about what's present. One thing is that it's here just instantaneously. The presence that can be known, the presence that's here, is here without beginning. There's sort of no lead up to it. It's just here. I mean, the only lead up that could ever be experienced, the only precedent to what's here, could only ever be experienced right now in this flash instant. So it really has no beginning. Now, again, I'm speaking experientially. That's the focus here, not conceptually. Conceptually, we can talk about, oh yeah, there's something that came before this moment, whatever I was doing 5 minutes ago. That's all a concept. I'm not saying it doesn't have its own validity. But experientially, there's no before. There's just this flash instant. What's present here is also, it's always here. There really is an experience. There really is no over there. There's no, if you try to imagine something that's not here in your imagination, something that's some imagined there that's not here, something spatial apart from here, where is that imagination occurring? That imagination is occurring here, right here. It's present. That's what I mean by here. It's here. So presence is always here. Even if we look at something visually, like if your eyes are open and you look across your room or wherever you are, at some object you might say is over there, not here. Where's the perception of that occurring? Of that object? Of where's the perception of over there occurring? It's occurring here. It's present here. So here is, this is always here. Presence is always right here. The here is constant, and there is nothing but here. The presence is also only ever occurring right now. There's literally, absolutely, literally no past, what we could call the past or the future. Those are abstractions. When it comes to experience, at least, they're complete abstractions. And the thing about the fact that the presence of what is always here, it's always right now. There's no other space, no other time, but here and now. That here-ness and now-ness of the presence of what is completely unconditioned by what's showing up. So here and now, we could call the presence here and now. The presence is present here and now, regardless of what it looks like. It could look like the greatest sorrow and the greatest heartbreak, and it would be right here, and it would be right now. And it could show up as the greatest bliss and satisfaction and fulfillment, and it would be right here, and it would be right now. So it doesn't matter what it looks like. It never departs from being here. It never departs from being now. Presence is always present. That's what I mean by it's unconditioned. It doesn't depend upon what it looks like. And this is very, very profound to begin to get a sense of this. Because ultimately what I'm pointing to in all of these inquiries that I engage in my writing and my work with others is, what is it that's always here? I mean, there's all this obvious coming and going. This is the nature of experiencing. It's natural impermanence and changeability. That's obvious. It's just slipping away, slipping away, slipping away. And yet, something's always here. What is that? Because that's where we can discover a great freedom, a great fount of well-being that doesn't come and go. And yet is the very genesis, if you will, of all coming and going, the very source of all coming and going, the very basis of all that we would say comes and goes. In a sense, in a very real sense, experientially, we can say that all there is presence. There is nothing but presence. It's the one thing. Appearing as so many things. Appearing in all the diverse ways presence appears, the presence of what is. But what else is there but presence? Now we tend to think of the presence of the field, this field of experience, this presence of experiencing in terms of parts and pieces. Seems to show up visually as parts and pieces, and of course all the ways we describe the different phenomena that appear experientially, thoughts, feelings, sensations, light, color, sound, emotion. We describe these as discrete things in the field of experience that are separate from one another, that are distinct from one another, and we could say are experienced from one perspective as distinct. But when we just feel the field of what's present here, this field, rather than simply abstracting about it, conceptualizing it, notice how there aren't any gaps anywhere. There's no, if you take one aspect of the visual field that you're calling the table over there, and then the floor on which I would say the table is resting in my living room, I can speak about them as separate objects that have somehow defined boundaries around them that separate them. I can see, oh yeah, there's the table, and then there's the floor. But I can look again and see that there's just a field of light, a field of color. And even the different colors, which seem to be what split the visual field up into these pieces, are a continuum. They absolutely have no clear gap or boundary line between them. So again, the field of presence, the field of experiencing, can be recognized to, from this perspective that I'm speaking about, not have any lines anywhere, any borders anywhere. It's borderless. It's edgeless. It's seamless. It's indivisible. You can't actually split it up. And yet it magically appears as being seemingly split into pieces. And yet it's not any more than the sea is split into separate waves. Yeah, from one perspective, there's all these separate waves, but the sea is seamless. There's just one sea. And there's just one sea of presence, one sea of experiencing, one sea of existence. Right now. Just feel the way it is that way. You can't tell where one thing ends and the next thing begins. Can't tell where thought ends and sound begins. They seem to be operating in little separate spheres, separated, but is there actually some gap there? Like, oh yeah, there's the gap where you get to the end of thought and then suddenly there's space for sound to appear. So it's an incredible thing that these things can appear separate and recognizable as discrete phenomena. And yet you also can't find the boundary between anything. Now, the presence of what is this that's here, there's no, we imagine, especially if we've been involved with any kind of spiritual teachings, that presence sort of is a kind of a thing, a sort of a recognition or a state or a kind of understanding or an insight or a particularity, a particular experience, a recognition of presence, the feeling of presence. But that's a misunderstanding, actually. Presence is simply what's here. And what's here is already here. And there's only presence, and there is no entering presence, and there is no exiting presence. There's only presence. What would entering and exiting, the only thing that exists, looks like? If you have an experience that you call entering presence, that's the presence of what is. If you have an experience that you label as having lost presence, I've exited presence, I'm no longer aware of presence, I've started thinking about something else, that's just what's present. Presence is not escapable. It's not, there's no outside of it. There's no inside or outside to it. So we can completely relax. It doesn't matter what we're experiencing when it comes to presence, because whatever we're experiencing is presence. So there's no particular experiences that get us closer to presence, the presence of what is, because every experience is the shining forth of presence, no matter how we're describing the experience. So no matter where you're traveling right now, where you may find yourself, you're just sitting here experiencing whatever is being experienced, and everywhere that attention or awareness or consciousness sort of wanders around the field of experience, tasting this, tasting that, encountering this phenomena, remembering this, thinking of this, feeling this, sensing this, noticing this, wondering about this, worried about this, no matter where it's venturing, traveling, cruising around the field of experience, this vast, boundless field of experience. And no matter what it encounters in the apparent world outside of us, quote unquote, no matter where it goes, it always encounters the same thing. Presence, the beingness of the moment. Nothing has to be done. And this is really a powerful thing to let kind of sink in. That the presence of what is here without our doing something to make this here. The presence is effortlessly present. It's already here long before we ever try to do anything to recognize it or make it appear more clear to us or notice it or discover it, or it's like it's way it's way what should I say, upstream of all any actions we might take. It's already here. You wake up in the morning, and if you're, say, a meditator, you have some spiritual practice and you're going to do to like kind of recognize presence or tune into presence or feel your oneness with presence. It's like the moment of waking up, well, actually the moment of sleep and the moment of dreaming, and then the moment we call waking up, they're all the presence. There's no getting closer to it. It's already here. It's already here. I mean, just the moment is here, isn't it? This moment is here. Are we doing anything to make this moment alive, to make this moment present? To make light be here, the light of this moment, the sound of this moment, the sensations arising, all of this, the thoughts arising, the feelings arising, the full symphony of experiential phenomena, all of it here effortlessly. It's completely here, inexplicably. The moment's here inexplicably, miraculously. No explanation at all for how this is able to be here. Whatever it is that's fueling this moment, that's the if you will, that energy, the force, the power, there's no explanation for that, and yet here it is, not because of anything that we're doing, it would seem. And whatever we think of as ourselves and imagine as maybe think of ourselves as a person attempting to find our way to this presence that I'm describing. The experience of being a person is presence. It's an aspect of presence. So we are presence. Everything about us. There's no one to get into presence. We are presence. We are the presence of what is. And we could say that all that's being experienced is what we are. Not someone having experience, but the full field of experiencing. All of it is being. life. And just as I said, if you look in the field of experience, you feel the field of experience right now, and you feel the way in which it is a continuum without any parts or pieces. It's seamless, right? Completely seamless, like the sea. Whatever you imagine yourself to be is absolutely inseparable from the sea. So in that sense, is there really some separate individual? Or is there just this? Completely undivided. And this that's here, this presence, I'm calling presence. Well, what is that? I can't really call it anything, because what's here in all the ways that it shows up in all the apparent flavors and qualities and textures and characteristics of this, just this incredible infinite diversity and range and the spectrum of human experience, spectrum of life. Not one part of that, not one thing that I seem able to characterize and describe, when I look at it, can I actually find it as, oh, there it is. I've located what it is. My fear, the presence of fear. Try to locate it. You can't get down to what it is. You can't get to the bottom of it. You can't pin down what it is. This is another characteristic of what's present, is its unfathomable nature. It's absolutely indefinable, indescribable nature. And one of the other qualities of the field of presence, field of what's here, is that it's dynamism. It's not holding still. I mean, in one sense it is holding still as always being presence, we could say, but when we feel what's here, the quality of it is one of constant flow, of fluidity, of one moment, one mood, one thought, one feeling moving into the next in this ceaseless transformation of what's here. The form of the moment, the shape of the moment is not static. This feeling, you can feel the way in which, as you just sit here in any moment, whether it's this moment or any other moment, it's like the moment is, it's sort of this kind of sense of it, like a drift, like drifting from one space to another, from one realm to another, from one perspective to another, from one mood to another. You don't really stay somewhere, like hanging out somewhere, even though we'll describe it like, oh yeah, I'm in this state right now. It's really not like that. Conceptually it is, and language suggests something static and fixed, but our experience constantly refutes that. It constantly shows us, if we just feel what's here, the fluid nature of this. This is not holding still. ever transforming, ever changing, ever morphing. And this is another reason why defining this is impossible. Because whatever we've defined is not here anymore. Whatever we've imagined, we've succeeded at defining and pinning down. Oh, here it is. I got it. It's called this, and it looks like this, and it feels like this, and it has this shape and size and form and texture and quality. And then no sooner does consciousness seem to be able to characterize this moment, and the moment just poof, it's gone. It's not here anymore. There's a new moment. So it's like we could try, and we do try, or consciousness attempts to concretize this, to substantialize it, to make it into a structure and a form. But reality will just go, sorry, I am too slippery for that. Watch me slip away, just like that. So in a very real sense, there's not really fixed forms here, even though it shows up as forms and structures and events and circumstances and thoughts and moments and memories. But each one of those things that I just named can't ultimately be named as a discrete thing, because whatever it is no longer. That's its ephemeral, transient nature. That's not philosophy. That's our actual experience right now. Whatever you imagine yourself to be right now, whatever you imagine yourself to be right now is just went up in a puff of smoke. And here's the next version of the moment, the next version of presence, the next version of, but it's so fast as to be like completely shocking how instantaneous the morphing is. Feel that, feel the way in which that the fluidity of the moment. You know, it's funny, a lot of spiritual practices I engaged in many myself for a long time to try to make myself less restless, to calm down, right? I pretty much failed miserably in that effort. I wasn't very good at it. I think maybe one reason is that restlessness, we could say, is the nature of reality. It's restless. It's always going from one thing to the next. Just look at it. It's just nature. So we could maybe do practices in a kind of contrived way to get it to like hold still, get that mind to hold still. But it's why? Why do we need to hold it still? And maybe there's not even something there to hold still, as I was just suggesting. In other words, it's already poof, gone, gone, gone. That's its restless nature. So it turns out that just feeling the truth, the reality, the inescapable fact of that instability of everything is its own ground, its own stability, its own rest. Because there's no effort to try to make it other than it is. That's rest, right? When there's no effort to make all the movement to stop, then there's rest. Isn't that paradoxical? But we can't stay there. Oh, I found rest and now I'm going to stay there. I'm going to sustain my state of peaceful rest and stability. That doesn't work, because you can't sustain anything, because it's not the nature of life to sustain its form, if you will, as I was just saying. And yet, magically, paradoxically, however you put it, there's something that's always here. And what that is can't be said. It's not a thing. This is always here. The miracle is always here, even if it's always showing up as something else. That's the constancy, the drone of being, of reality. The song is always singing. The song of reality is always singing. It's just always a different song in every moment. But the sounding is constant. It's probably a good place to maybe open it up to you folks. And I'm always interested in hearing where, in particular, where what I'm sharing, it's sort of like, where is it landing in you? Like, where is it connecting? Is it making sense? Do you have a sense of what I'm attempting with words? Which is impossible because the words can't capture what's beyond words, but nevertheless, I attempt that over and over again. Is there a place where you find yourself kind of bumping up against like, sort of, yes, but I wonder about this. What about this? Or a place where it doesn't quite connect, and you'd like to explore that in some way.
Well, John, you talk about presence.
Yeah.
And when you talk about it, it sounds so neutral, like presence. It's like, so what about presence, makes it painful? You know what I'm saying? It's like, how do what is pain or grief? If this neutral presence,
Yeah. Well, it seems like what's here has two qualities, and they always seem to be here. Two, sort of fundamental aspects. One is their presence, their sheer presence, the beingness of whatever is here. There's a beingness to this moment. The Buddhists call the suchness of this moment, the existence of it, the isness of it. Here it is, something's here. But it doesn't actually only show up as some kind of blank, bland, neutral nothingness. It always seems to show up as something. In other words, as flavor, as quality, as certain kinds of, it's like it's always dressed up as something in terms of how it presents. So it seems to be that there always has a kind of an implication to it of being something, even though I just spent the last half hour sort of deconstructing that you can't find the thing, but it shows up as being something, right? So, and that you could say is both, there's kind of different layers of that, in the sense of it's almost like a proto-interpretation, like before the interpretation gets very complex and elaborated and of whatever's here, there's a kind of an initial like recognition that something is distinct from something else in a very sort of primal way, like heat and cold, like at a very primal, like immediately there's this recognition of the distinction of those qualitatively, right? So it's not Now there might be additional layers of like, I don't like cold or I love heat or vice versa, right? So that's like a layers of interpretation. Um, I sometimes say that every moment is like a two-sided coin. On one side of the coin is the sheer presence of it. On the other side of the coin is the description of it, the seeming qualities of it. And so this is to come back to your question about um, something like grief. So something, the basically indeterminate, unresolvable, bottomless, fathomless infinity of existence shows up in life for the human as being patterned in particular ways, right? Like the patterns of life, the patterns of this mystery. And one pattern that we could describe shows up as this thing we call grief, and it has certain seeming qualities and characteristics, right? That have a kind of a taste. There's like a flavor to grief that's distinct from other flavors of experience, right? So we tend to mostly live in the described, you know, dimension of the coin. You know, we're functioning as if all these things are actually what we imagine them to be based on our descriptions. But that's only half of the story, is really what I'm talking about. Because the other side of the story is that, and this can be discovered by taking any state, including grief, and feeling whatever it is that's actually there, that the mind or the consciousness is labeling and describing as grief, and maybe even on top of that, saying things like, I don't like this, I wish this was gone, when is this going to end? How come this is happening to me? I mean, those are like the extra layers of interpretation. But even that initial interpretation of like what it is, like, oh, I've pinned it down, I've named it, I've described it. But whatever it is you've described, that we've described, or consciousness has described, the question I pose again and again and again, as you know, is, well, what is it that's actually there? What is it that we what is it that's appearing? Just because we have a name for it doesn't mean we actually know what it is in a more fundamental kind of primal way. You know, what are the particles of grief? You know, what makes it up? What is it constituted of? What is it comprised of? What are the building blocks of grief? Experiential building blocks. You know, it's made up, we could say, of a very complex set of thoughts, moods, memories, um, sensations. It's this complex stew of phenomena, isn't it? That then sort of coalesces seemingly as this thing, recognizable state called grieving. And but all of those things that make it up that I was just describing, thoughts, feelings, memories, sensations, and so on, we could do the same inquiry as, well, what are all those made of? You know, just keep going down the rabbit's hole of investigating experientially, not analytically. Experientially, what is actually here? And what's very curious and astonishingly so is that you can't find what it is, and yet it's here.
And that was my experience last week, you know, when my cat died. And so I'm speaking about a cat, my beloved cat who died last week. And
Mm-hmm.
I was very, and, you know, I thought of you, John. You know, as I was like sobbing and
Mm-hmm.
like, I thought, well, what is this? You know, what there's like, it's like there was nothing tangible.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I knew I was sobbing and I missed my cat and it was horrible, but I couldn't grasp, you know, the feeling. It was like cotton. I mean, I describe it as very fuzzy,
Mm-hmm.
but what is that? You know, there's like, it was fascinating in a way that I was able to kind of look at this experience and find nothing. And that was almost infuriating too because it felt like something, right?
Right. It does. It does feel like something.
And then even like what you shared today about morphing, a week ago today, I couldn't be on this call because I was so upset.
Hmm.
And now a week later, 7 days, it morphed
Uh-huh.
into being able to talk to you without crying, and
Hmm.
it's like, what's that? This morphing. It's really fascinating.
Well, and that morphing, which we again often will describe as something that occurs over some period of time, right? Like, well, I had this grief and it went on for a while, and then eventually things settled down and it wasn't so intense, like, you how we're describing that, over the course of, say, the week. But even more immediately, the thing that we're naming that's occurring. Remember, experience is only it's not happening really in time, is it? So something's being encountered right now. And what's being encountered right now, where does it go in the instant of its arising? It goes away. And what is this instability like? Why is that so central, say, in like in the Buddhist teaching? And why do I point it out all the time? Well, for one thing, my what I'm teaching here and what I'm exploring here with everyone is like, let's look at experience and let's not assume that we know what it is because we have language for it. And we can discover through that exploration that our actual experience, our direct experience, really actually deviates in quite shocking ways sometimes from what we think is going on here. And again, conventionally speaking, we talk about and we operate in the world as humans as if there's actually things that are holding still, that are stable, right? But our actual experience just goes, no, I'm sorry, that's not true. Look. And so this thing that you were experiencing, and to whatever degree still might say you are, from instant to instant, um, it is not holding still. It's a shapeshifter. Now, it turns out that the unstable nature of this has everything to do with freedom. What do I mean by that? Well, because what's appearing here experientially has no stability, there's not actually a thing here, is there? There's not something here, no matter how we're describing it experientially, there's not ever anything actually there that could ever trouble us, that we could ever be bound up in, or the victim of, or that could be a problem that needs to be fixed or solved. Because all of those ways of holding our experience as potential problems, sources of suffering, um, things that we can be caught in or victimized or stuck or confused by, all those suggest a kind of stability and a thingness to phenomena. And yet, again, experience just keeps showing us that there's not anything here that we could ever possibly be stuck in, because the moment releases itself. In the moment of its arising, it releases itself. So what is there to be stuck in? There's not, actually. And that can be discovered by feeling the nature of what's going on here, rather than merely thinking and imagining and conceptualizing what it is, which we're all quite familiar with the latter. We're describing our experience, or consciousness is describing it all the time, rendering it, holding it in a certain way. And so when you're visited by, states we would typically think of as problems, sources of suffering that have to be overcome or healed in some way or transcended or whatever, maybe avoided. um, there's this other part of it, the other side of the coin of that experience, which is it's ungraspable, indefinable, ever shape-shifting. Um, nature. And that, of course, holds true for you as the apparent subject having the experience. You're just like that experience. You're not a thing either, because whatever you are as an experience is not holding still, right? So it's just complete instability mixed with instability, ungraspability mixed with ungraspability, infinity dancing with infinity, boundlessness playing with boundlessness. That's what's going on. Always. Whether it's the greatest joy or the greatest sorrow, it's still the boundlessness dancing with the boundlessness. And where is there a problem in that? There's not anything to define as a problem, because this is not definable. Which doesn't negate the other side of the coin, by the way. You know, like I've got this whatever thing going on with my body, feels like something that I want to heal. So I go ahead and do that, take whatever steps I can to make it feel better and work better and function better. Great, fantastic. But all along, there's this other side of the coin that is not operating in that way. It's kind of like, depends on what is the body? Well, it depends on this perspective that you're looking at it from, right? The human body. From one perspective, it looks like this form, that has solidity. And then dig a little deeper, investigate a little further, and boy, it doesn't look like that anymore, does it? It looks like this absolute chaotic dance of trillions of ungraspable, insubstantial waves and space, like if you look at it from a physics standpoint. So which one is it? All of the above. It's all of it, It's very paradoxical. So it's like heartbreaking, just excruciating, the loss of this thing you so loved, You don't have to deny any of that. Why deny any of that? That's part of the way life is expressing itself as that experience. And it's not merely that.
What is it that I'm missing? There's this sense of missing. What am I missing? I mean, I think about him, I have memories of him, I feelings about him. I mean, I'm missing the body, I guess, but
You're missing
you
all of it,
know,
the whole thing, the whole experience, the connection, the intimacy, the love, the sharing, the beauty of this creature, the love that you felt exchanged between the two of you, all of it. And one of the things that's so amazing, Pam, that continues to kind of blow me away is that, what was I talking about at the beginning about how this presence is unconditioned? Like, so there you're having these giant waves of grief, in the wake of the loss of this beloved animal, your friend and whatever, companion, and so many years. Just huge waves, right? So it doesn't matter how huge and uncomfortable those waves might be, all there is still the presence of the sea, right? So the sea is not conditioned by what it looks like. And then when the waves calm down, you're not any closer to presence. And you're not any further when the waves and the storms are raging in the sea, right? It's all the way the sea happens to be dancing. And so the more we realize that no experience represents either, in a very real sense, no experience represents either a threat or a benefit, because they're all presence. That frees us up, in a sense, to let everything be as it is. because you don't lose anything when you're experiencing grief. And you don't actually gain anything when the grief settles down. It's just different flavors of the presence. And we can do whatever we are inclined to do and feel like we have the wherewithal to do to alter our experiences and circumstances in ways that we find, consonant with our own values and desires and so on. I mean, that's part of human life, right? But from the standpoint of presence, nothing can make presence more present or less present. That's how absolute it is. When I went through the very most intense grief experience I ever went through, and I've touched on this sometimes, you probably heard me talk about it a little bit, that I remember my father in particular, but other people in my life kind of worried, like, well, I think you need to like calm this down. It's too much, right? It's like you just seem overwrought with this. And I could feel in myself like there was no sense of needing to do anything about the ferocity of what was being experienced. Why? Why did anything need to be done about it? It was just the force of life itself. It's just the sheer power of the cosmos, not a threat, just an expression of life. Completely different way to be, to kind of see it in a sense and experience it. Is wow, one thing is this is happening to me, like I'm being crushed by these waves, right? That's one way we sometimes and oftentimes experience it as humans, or imagine we're experiencing it. And then flip it around from the perspective of the ocean that's giving rise to those waves of presence. A wave's not crashing over us. A wave is just being a wave. In a sense, it's an expression of us. And where is the threat? There is no threat. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And, it's astonishing how that crashing wave, which doesn't happen all that often, at least over here.
Mm-hmm.
It's astonishing the power of it, and to witness, or not even witness, but to be that
Mm-hmm.
is like, whoa, I mean, tsunamis don't happen every day.
Right.
So it's, there's almost like this curiosity, or this
Mm-hmm.
enthrallment with the
Right.
power of it.
Right.
Yeah. I
Now,
mean,
I know exactly what you mean, and sometimes even in some of the traditions, like I've heard sometimes in like the Dzogchen Buddhist tradition, they talk about that these intense afflictive states like jealousy they have that much more power in them. Um, like I get that on one level, but I would also remind all of us that the power, this is always full on, 1,000% full on radiating reality. So this moment is definitely a tsunami.
so
Um,
why doesn't it feel like it then? Or what
just
is it
the different flavors,
like?
It's like a moment of boredom feels like a more moment of boredom that's distinct from a moment of excitement. And yet both of them are the full force of the cosmos, just showing up differently. This is the magic show. It can look like anything and does look like everything, and yet it's always itself. It's always the universe appearing as boredom or excitement or quietude or raging, or just looks a lot of different ways, an infinite number of ways, seemingly. So, what one thing I would say is just to kind of sort of encapsulate our conversation is that from the standpoint of discovering what's most fundamental about this, it does not matter what you're experiencing, because every experience is it. Every experience is a doorway into the same infinity because every experience is made of infinity. So that's fortunate because you don't have to go, you don't have to look for some other experience. Just look at this experience and this is it. Of course, there's no other experience to look at, but
And then there's freedom in that. You know, you talked about freedom.
there's complete freedom in that. It's the freedom, and the real freedom is the freedom from the the implications that our descriptions suggest, which is that there's things that are happening to me that are potential threats, that I can potentially be bothered by or tormented by or stuck in or the victim of. That's all our descriptions of reality. That's an implication of that that's like can feel pretty oppressive sometimes and the source of a lot of suffering, we could say. But from the perspective of the unfathomable, indescribable, indefinable nature of what's here, the implications are very different. The implications are one of complete fulfillment and nourishment and wholeness and beauty and well-being, stability. Ease. Very different set of implications. So all the waves, of grief that have visited you and may continue to visit you in whatever form they do, just let them be as they are. Allow them to be the magnificent display of reality that they are. And realize, to whatever extent you find yourself able to, that they are waves rising up from the sea of existence and have no actual independent existence from the very ground of everything. Put it another way, your grief is God, just like everything else is. Just like this moment is.
So it's conditioning that we want to escape certain feelings.
Yeah, somewhere along the line of, if we look at this sort of in some kind of timeline of his history or something of evolution of humans, to just for purposes of conversation, somewhere along the way, we came to imagine that in order to find well-being, we had to have certain kinds of experiences and avoid other kinds of experiences. And maybe as some of that is driven as organisms, we have a natural movement away from things that seem harmful to the organism and a movement towards things that seem beneficial to it. But what I'm talking about is the discovery of another order of benefit that is intrinsic to all phenomena and all experiences. And it's not something that we've been introduced to, most of us, that possibility that well-being is the very nature of existence itself in its more basic kind of primal.
Yeah, that's a game changer for sure.
Yes, it is. It's when I teach my grad students who are training to be therapists in psychology, I'm definitely introducing them to a radical notion that can really turn a discipline like psychology upside down on its head. Pretty much. To the degree they get exactly how much it's turning it upside down on its head, that varies. But I think they get a sense of like, yeah, it's like, Yeah, it's a very different perspective. That this moment, exactly as it is everything that we ever wanted and could ever hope for. Is the perfection, is the completeness, is the fulfillment, the radiance, the freedom.
Most people who go to therapy don't want to hear that.
Well, the interesting thing is that as all humans, they seem, we all seem to be kind of driven, have an impulse towards a movement towards a search for happiness, well-being. I mean, that's universal, right? So in some sense, some part of them might potentially be intrigued by that possibility that they already have what they're looking for. They already are what they're looking for. They are made of the very thing they're looking for. We all are made of the very thing we're looking for. As is everything. I mean, it's amazing. It's like life itself is made of the very thing that we imagine is not here, happiness, well-being, openness, love, harmony, equanimity. These are the very ground. This is like that. I'm just giving qualities. These are like the basic fundamental qualities of reality itself. I mean, it's funny. Like we're trying to make it happen, but it's happening. We're trying to become peaceful, but peace is the deepest nature of reality itself, because there's not two things. So where is their struggle? The waves of the sea are not pushing against one another. They're not fighting with each other. They may be dancing with each other and even
Like
colliding
trying
with. What's that?
like trying to find rain in a monsoon.
Pretty much. It's yeah.
That was a plug on one of your books that I love.
Yeah, I like that title. There we are out in the rainstorm, like a monsoon. And we're going, where is the rain? That's what it's like. I heard once, I think I might have put it in the intro to one of my books. I heard um, Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, was being interviewed by, it might have been Bill Moyers, and Moyers was asking him, what's life all about? What are human beings looking for? Is it meaning and purpose? And Joseph Campbell said, I mean, he's like suddenly become an expert on what it is, but he said, no, it's not meaning and purpose. Human beings are looking to feel alive. They want to feel alive. And I wrote in my book, I go, well, that's kind of funny. You just made my point. We're looking for all that exists, that always and already exists, is complete aliveness. How much more alive do you want this to be? This is life. Full blown. Full on. So look no further than what's right here, this very instant. Bam. The Big Bang.
So what's the veil then? What is this veil that, humans are wearing, this veil that they don't see that?
Well, the way to get beyond the veil is to realize that the veil is made of the very same thing you're looking for, and there are no veils. That's the end of veils. There aren't actually any veils. Just looks like it. Because the veils are made of life too, right? So everywhere you look, you find the same thing: life, reality, presence, call it what you will, God, the unnameable, the mystery. There's no words for it. But whatever is making all of this makes the veils and everything else.
Nothing is excluded, seems.
Nothing is excluded. In some of my earlier writing, where I was writing more poetry, if I can find this poem, it's like, um, uh, well, this is what I was just saying to you, Pam. Maybe I'll read this one. The barrier is also God. Think for a moment of anything you perceive as an obstacle to your own realization: mental restlessness, conditioning, fear, desire, self-contraction, resistance. I'm sure the list is fairly long. But if the ultimate truth is that there is only one thing going on here, one life, one energy, one reality, not two, then all these apparent obstacles must in fact be manifestations of the very same one you believe that they're keeping you from seeing and knowing. In other words, if the walls are made of the very thing you're seeking, then there really are no walls. Maybe these apparent obstacles are none other than the very thing that you long to touch. So there's that moment, like, God, I'm experiencing this difficult state of grief. It's not an obstacle to anything. Whether you appear to be lost in the frothy waves of life or submerged in the still depths below, wake up and realize that you can never be apart from the sea.
Quite the way with words there, John.
That's my favorite time right now. It's 11:11. Speaking of one thing, it's amazing how often that number shows up in my consciousness in life. It's funny. Sweet little reminder. We have a little bit of time left. If anyone wanted to share something or explore something with me, I'm happy to hear from you. For a long time when I was a meditator, I had been trained, conditioned, I guess, whatever, um, to imagine that what I was trying to do was cultivate something, a kind of a presence or an awareness that I would then seem to lose and then need to recultivate it. And I remember sitting on a plane. I can't remember where I was going, and I thought, well, I'll meditate a little bit. And it dawned on me during this meditation that what I imagined was coming and going, that there was something that wasn't coming and going. There was something that was always present. And this is kind of coming full circle to what we were talking about earlier at the outset of the call about ever-present presence. And um, one way I would characterize that is that no matter how the moment is showing up, by definition, it's being known, isn't it? So I'm often talking about what is the common denominator? To find this one thing that is appearing as everything, we have to find what's common in a sense, because all we see is seeming differentiation. It's like, what are you talking about? One thing. I see a multitude of things. So what is it that, in a sense, is the unifying principle? And there's several different doorways into that. But one is to see that the knowing of this moment is inseparable from the moment. So we often think like the moment appears and then I become aware of it, right? That's how we tend to structuralize it. Something appears and then I perceive it. But actually, the appearance of this moment is simultaneous with the knowing of it. We could, in fact, say that the moment is appearing because of awareness. They're not two things. The awareness is so often talked about in contemplative traditions as this kind of space, get into the awareness that is untouched by all the comings and goings, and that's fine. I mean, that can be a useful kind of way of playing around with it, but what feels much truer to my own experience is that the knowing is like, um, you know how whether you're inside right now or outside, the light, the sunlight, is completely pervading the space that you're in, isn't it? The space is fully lit, even if there's gradations of light. So the sunlight, the light is pervading the space that you're in. And the knowing of this moment is completely fills the moment. It's not like over here. The knowing is everything, and it's inseparable from everything. So I wrote a poem coming out of that airplane meditation, and that tries to basically point out that that you never leave here. You never leave the knowing of this moment. You can't leave the knowing of this moment. And just feel how powerful that is. You can never be away from the knowing of this moment. It's not possible. And the poem's called Is It True? Is it true? Are you really lost, caught up in the currents of the thinking mind? Or can you feel the cool splash of water and wind upon your face as the river rushes by? Is it true? Are you really lost, stumbling along in some dark forest of worry or fear? Or is something here, something that knows just how black the night really is? Is it true? Are you really lost, wandering the shore in some hazy fog of forgetfulness? Or have you always been here, drinking in the fresh sea air and marveling at the wonder of the gray night? We never leave here. We never leave here. We never leave the awareness of here. It's not possible. Yes, the moment always looks different. It always feels different. The shape, the color, the texture, the flavor. But it always is being known, whatever it is. Try to not know this moment. Try to not feel this moment. Try to not notice this moment. It's not possible. If you're quote unquote distracted from the moment, that's just what you're now noticing. But just notice in these last few minutes just how attention's just drifting all over the place. Just drifting from here to there, noticing this, noticing that. But you're never drifting away from anything. You're always, it's like the drifting is constantly drifting into reality. Because there's only reality for it to drift into. So you don't drift away from something, you're just drifting into what's here. In a sense, you're not going anywhere in all the drifting. And yet it feels like we're going all over the place. And it's like both are true. We're traveling to all these different imaginary lands, or if we're traveling like pre-COVID and we're traveling at different places, we're just going to different versions of reality, different parts of the sea, but we never leave the sea. This sea of vitality and aliveness that is so rich, so juicily, vibrantly, ungraspably alive and shining forth as all moments, as all experience, as all circumstance. Somehow, something is shining forth. The moment is shining forth. Is it not? So we can appreciate both the way that it shines, all the distinctness, and also the fact that it's shining. That's the Shakti, that's the energy, the sheer energy of it, the sheer exuberance of life, the shining itself. Not only what it looks like, but that it's even here. Because that's the common denominator. The shining, it's always shining. Even the darkness is shining. Well, it's lovely to be with you all. Pleasure as always. I will look forward to seeing some of you another time, maybe.
Thanks so much, John. Thank you.
Thank you all.